All right, well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining in virtually. Great to see you all in the session today, and good morning. My name is Stephanie Beauchamp, and I am the Assistant Director for an NSF grant that's funded here in Colorado, and it works specifically with students of color interested in STEM pathways. A little bit about me: I was born and raised in New Mexico. I do identify as a mestiza Latina. I've spent my whole educational career working with students of color. And really, so this combined with my heritage is what kind of forms the basis for the research that I'm going to present to you today. In this session, we'll talk about Latino male engagement in their first year of college after high school graduation. We'll look at GPA outcome data, as well as interviews where Latino males discuss how concurrent enrollment impacted their college experiences after high school graduation. There's going to be times throughout the presentation where I'll ask for your thoughts in the chat. And then at the end, I'll provide recommendations, resources, and as we said, I'll answer any questions also at that time. There's a link for feedback for all of the sessions today, I believe, and that's located in your agendas. So let's get started. I think a great place for us to start today is the first group question. So in the chat, I'd love to hear your thoughts. The question is, how does your program support Latino males specifically? So it can be anything from direct supports, indirect supports. If you can't think of anything at all, I want to hear that as well. So again, feel free to add your thoughts in the chat. How does your program support Latino males? And while you're adding your thoughts in the chat, let's go ahead and take a small glimpse into the Latino educational profile. I think that's a really great basis for us to understand the research that's presented today. So we'll start with the Latinx diaspora. And if you're not familiar with this phrase, it means actually quite a bit of things, but for purposes of today, we'll condense it down to talk about how Latinx populations are migrating throughout the United States, both from outside of the border as well as within. And so what we're seeing are a lot of Latinx populations in places that we wouldn't normally expect, places like Georgia. There's some places throughout the Midwest. And so when we talk about some of the experiences of our Latino male students today, it's important to keep in mind that these issues aren't just central to Colorado or the Southwest. It's really issues that are impacting us sort of nationwide. The other important thing to understand about the Latino educational profile is what enrollment looks like. So we're actually seeing an increase in enrollment for Latinx populations, again, throughout the United States, both in K-12 settings as well as in college settings. And so if you take a look at the map that's pictured there, the red line is our Latinx populations. And in fact, they're actually the only demographic group since about 2010 that are increasing in college enrollment throughout the United States. All other demographic groups are decreasing in enrollment, which is pretty interesting to see. But when we take a look at actual credential attainment data, it's not lining up, right? So the graph that you see pictured there is a comparison of high school diploma rates and bachelor degree attainment rates for our Latinx populations, our Black and African American populations, as well as our white populations, broken down by gender. And so consistently across the board, whether we're looking at high school diploma credential attainment rate, it could be certificates, associate degrees, all the way through to doctoral level degrees, consistently our Latino males are the lowest demographic group in attainment rates. So if you take a look at the bachelor degree attainment rate, for example, our Latino males are earning their bachelor's degree at a rate that's less than half of their white males peers. And so the question is, what's the problem, right? Well, you might have guessed, we have high enrollment of our Latinx populations, in particular our Latino males, but unfortunately, the degree attainment rates just aren't matching, right? So the big question, how can concurrent enrollment, can it help close this gap that we're seeing? And before I talk about some of the national data, I have another question for you. So what high outcomes do you see from your concurrent enrollment students, either in your program or statewide, or just maybe some literature that you've read? What are some of those high outcomes that you expect from students who have previously taken concurrent enrollment programs? And I'll give you one example. Maybe in your particular program, you see concurrent enrollment students coming in, matriculating into your college, and maybe there's less need for remediation. So from your programs, again, what are those high outcomes that you see? Feel free to add them in the chat. Love to know your thoughts. So yeah, Mary, for example, talked about pass rates over 90%. Absolutely. We see very high pass rates for our concurrent enrollment students. And that pretty much lines up with what we see nationally as well, right? So as you may know, concurrent enrollment is present in all 50 US states. 38 states have legislation surrounding concurrent enrollment. And in fact, 29 of those states have legislation that's either specific to minoritized students or has legislation that has an extended mission or intent to support creating access to minoritized students. And pretty consistently across the board throughout the US, we also see concurrent enrollment touting these high outcomes, right? So Mary talked about pass rates over 90%, passing all of subsequent college classes. I see in the chat, confidence going into post high school programs, absolutely. So yeah, other ones that I've seen, high GPA outcomes, higher transfer rates. So consistently across the board, we're seeing our concurrent enrollment students with these high outcomes as they participate in a CE program first. What the data won't tell you though, is that there's some gaps, right? So first, nationally, concurrent enrollment programs are predominantly accessed by white affluent students. Not true for Colorado, but in many other states, students sometimes have to pay out of pocket for classes. So that might be why we see national data predominantly leaning towards white affluent students. Within Colorado, it's really going to depend on the district that the program is serving, of course. We now have legislation that says, advertisement for the program has to go out twice a year. Before we had that legislation, we might have seen programs predominantly accessed by white affluent students because there's maybe just, generational college attendance by families. But really the gap here and the big question is, if programs are being accessed by predominantly white affluent students, is that skewing the data towards high outcomes? And we just don't know because the data isn't there, right? Another big gap in some of this literature that we see is that, data is nationally, sometimes it's just not disaggregated by race and ethnicity or other demographic categories like gender. And of course, that's a big gap, but oftentimes when data is disaggregated by race and ethnicity or other demographic categories, sometimes that can be very deficit based. What I mean by that is that data sometimes turns into how white students are performing as compared to all other demographic groups, right? Because our white students are oftentimes outperforming other demographic groups, we get these two lump sum categories, white students and all others. And so really those comparisons really become deficit based. So what does the data say from the research that I did here in Colorado? So I took a look at two Colorado community colleges that belong to the system office. Both were Hispanic serving institutions. If you're not familiar with that term, it just means that both colleges serve at minimum 25% Hispanic students. The students that participated both in GPA data that we're going to see in a minute, as well as the interviews, all identified as Latino males, but it's important to point out that there were different forms of identification here, right? So some identified as Mexican American, some identified as Hispanic, some identified as Latino. So we had, even within this narrow demographic group, we still had a wide variety of how people identified. All the students belong to, at one point in time, a community college. The two that are included in this data, they aged between 18 to 21 years old. And this was really because I looked at data for up to 3 years after high school graduation. So to take a look at the GPA outcomes, the first comparison was between our Latino males who took concurrent enrollment classes and our Latino males who did not take concurrent enrollment classes. And you can see here a large percentage of our Latino males across the board identify as first generation. And then on average, our concurrent enrollment Latino males are earning about 9.7 CE credits. So in the first semester, what we did see is that our Latino males who take concurrent enrollment classes, they do in fact have a significantly higher GPA than our Latino males who don't take concurrent enrollment classes. And this is true also for second semester as well. So again, our CE Latino males, first and second semester after high school graduation, are earning a significantly higher GPA than their non-CE Latino male peers. But if you haven't noticed yet, there's a big problem with the numbers presented, right? And that's how low these GPAs are across the board. Whether our Latino males are taking CE classes or not, that average GPA of a 1.9 or a 1.6 is really just, in my opinion, too low to be considered a high outcome, right? This 1.9, 1.6, it's below that 2.0 threshold that a lot of us have to consider C average passing, right? And so in this first semester, what we're seeing is quite a few students who Latino males in particular, who just might not be passing their classes. And so what that does is that with second semester data, we have a big drop off in students who are a part of the data set, and you can see that in those numbers there. If you like data, I took it further. So I also did a comparison between Latino males who took all of their concurrent enrollment classes at a high school as compared to those who took at least one concurrent enrollment class on a college campus. And so again, across the board, right, we still see high first generation status. And then, you know, the average CE credits earned are there for both categories of students. In first semester, what we see is really no significant difference between GPA outcomes. And in second semester, that's where we see the significant difference with our Latino males who take at least one concurrent enrollment class on a college campus. They're earning a significantly higher GPA. Again, just to speak to what's important about these GPAs when comparing these two groups. Of course, data matches, right? We have low GPAs across the board, but if our Latino males take at least one concurrent enrollment class on a college campus, they're going to earn just above that 2.0 threshold. That's that C average passing. The other really significant thing that I found is that on average, you know, if they're taking a class on a college, at least one on a college campus, they're earning on average about 19.4 CE credits. And that's almost a third of an associate's degree, which is just absolutely amazing. So we'll revisit what the GPA, the significance of the GPA data is sort of towards the end. But I want to get to the interviews. And before we talk about the interviews, it's important to introduce you to Yosa. So if you don't know who Yosa is, pretty critical in the Latinx critical race theory, has developed a few of her own models. Yosa is important because she talks about how school systems tend to think that they're already effective and equitable. And so she says what often happens is that these overgeneralizations really impact students and parents and community, because we expect them to change and assimilate to these systems that we already in our minds think at their core are maybe effective and equitable. And Yosa says, well, this isn't actually right. We're seeing a discrepancy in our Latinx students as compared to other folks, other students, because we're not valuing the wealth of knowledge that they bring to college environments. So she developed this model of cultural capital. Some of you may have already seen it. There's sort of 6 core areas that she talks about that our Latinx students have this knowledge that they're bringing into college environments that we actually really need to value. So when I talk about these interviews, I'm actually looking for 2 of these core types of capital. The first one is aspirational capital, right? So aspirational capital means that our Latino males, they're maintaining hopes and dreams for their future academic goals, despite any barriers that they might encounter. And they're building these aspirations through family, friends, mentors, and experiences, which is where we're going to focus. So when I talk about the interviews, one thing that we're looking for is to determine if concurrent enrollment programs are helping our Latino males build aspirations to go to college, and is the program helping them build aspirations to earn a college degree. The second type of capital that I was looking for is navigational capital. And what navigational capital says is that our Latino male students, they're navigating through institutions that weren't necessarily built for them, right? So if we think about the first college here in the US, we have Harvard, built in the 1600s, and only white affluent students were able to access education. And so there's some practices and processes that have survived 400 plus years. So when I say, institutions that weren't really built with students of color, particularly Latinx students in mind, this is what I mean. And what Yosa was saying is that our Latinx students are in fact navigating through these oppressive institutions, and some of them are doing it successfully because they have navigational capital. So navigational capital is built through family, friends, mentors, again, experiences. And so again, when we were looking at these interviews, we're looking to determine if CE programs are helping our Latino males build the skills that they need to navigate through college systems. So just to give you a rough idea of the interview questions, first, I wanted to make sure that our students interviewed that they had an awareness that they were in a CE program. I know sometimes that's at the top of our minds. Yes, the quick answer is yes. All of our Latino males knew that they were in a concurrent enrollment program. Some took their classes only on a high school campus, some took a couple on a college campus, did both, and then some only took their classes on a college campus. So we had a wide range of Latino males who participated in the interviews. And again, really the focus here is, did concurrent enrollment impact their students' aspirations to go to college, their aspirations to get a degree, and did concurrent enrollment have an impact on their ability to navigate through college systems? So the first look is aspirational capital. And so I looked for aspirational capital through things like, do our Latino male students, after participating in a CE program, do they have like an increased motivation to go to college? Or did they attribute concurrent enrollment to giving them an increased access to college? And some of the kind of bigger themes that were mentioned was our Latino male students found that concurrent enrollment programs gave them a head start, gave them some self-confidence, gave them some pride. So again, all of these key terms is how we sort of identified building those aspirations. So Gustavo, for example, was a student who talked about how had he not done concurrent enrollment, anything else that he thought about doing or that he would have done, it just wouldn't have happened had he not participated in concurrent enrollment classes. And what was really moving here was when he talked about, this idea that going to college might seem small to other people, but really it just wasn't small to him. He was a first generation student, and again, concurrent enrollment really gave him that general access and that head start that allowed him to keep going. Romeo was another such student. His interview was interesting because he had a very acute awareness that Latinx students are less likely to go to college, maybe because they can't afford it or they can't access it. And so he really talked about how concurrent enrollment gave him that opportunity to access college, particularly for someone like him who belongs to a low socioeconomic status, as well as a demographic group that's less likely to access. And then Miguel, he talked a lot about having anxiety about going to college. He just wasn't sure if it was for him. He asked things like, was he even smart enough to go to college? Was it right for him? Should he just do something else? But he said after taking concurrent enrollment classes that he found in being successful in those classes, he thought, if I can do this, I can do anything. I can get through college. And so just taking those CE classes really gave him some self-confidence and some pride in matriculating onto a community college campus and continuing through with his associate's degree. So overall, across the board, every single student who was interviewed said, yes, concurrent enrollment helped build my aspirations to go to college and helped build my aspirations to get a college degree. Next, I looked at navigational capital, right? And this was seen through things like, do students have a comfort for college norms? And I looked at both sides of the house, both academic experiences as well as student services. So Gustavo was an example of a student who talked about how concurrent enrollment gave him all of the tools and resources that he needed to be successful once he matriculated on to a college campus and started college after high school graduation. He really talked about how concurrent enrollment gave him everything that he needed to be successful, and it was just up to him to utilize those tools that he received. And so kind of in summary with Gustavo, he talked about those tools and resources being useful for him both on both sides of the house, both in his classroom settings, as well as engaging in the student services side of the house, whether that meant financial aid or it meant interacting with some of the student groups that he belonged to. Romeo was an example of a student who talked about how concurrent enrollment, and as you may be able to tell from his quote there, he took his concurrent enrollment classes on a college campus. So he talked about how the exposure to different college classes, being surrounded by much older and much diverse college students, that that experience really helped embed with him an understanding of what it means to be a scholar in his classroom settings. And then on the other side of the house, he also talked about how concurrent enrollment helped him learn college systems. So navigating through student resources, again, financial aid, admissions, advising, that it really wasn't as difficult or convoluted as it previously seemed before he had that exposure to college classes through the CE program. So again, across the board, pretty consistently, every single student talked about how concurrent enrollment and participation in the program helped them navigate through academic experiences within the classroom. And then all students except for one talked about how concurrent enrollment helps them navigate through the student services side of the house. And that one can be seen here with Miguel. So while I've labeled this part negative experiences, I'm really more talking about what I would consider missed opportunities. And I think it's important to mention. So we actually only had 3 instances that I would label as negative experiences just because of the missed opportunity. And these are 2 of those 3. So back to the student services side of the house, Miguel talked about a lot of positive benefits that he had through participating in concurrent enrollment. But he did find that when it actually came to transferring or what we might call matriculating onto a community college campus, that he wasn't ever really shown how to transfer, right? When it came to financial aid, for example, or getting registered for classes, that he really found that he had to figure all of that out on his own. And so I call that a missed opportunity, mostly because think back, right? We had about on average 84% of our students identifying as first generation. So if they don't have someone at home who can help them navigate through some of these processes like financial aid, registering for classes, we absolutely will have some students who fall through the cracks. I in particular am an example of someone who my parents didn't go to college when I was starting college. My dad went later on, but he was an older student. And so I had nobody to tell me about financial aid. So in my undergrad program, I didn't even know financial aid was a thing. I didn't know what it was. I never applied for it. Talk about a huge missed opportunity, right? And so again, thinking about some of our Latino males here and the ones that we serve, particularly those who are first generation status, we're going to have a missed opportunity, and some are going to fall through the cracks if they're not, successfully navigating through our systems. I included Gustavo here also because he, again, was another student who had a very acute awareness of his Mexican identity. And so his experience, he really associated with his identity. So he talked about how engaging with student services, not all of them, I'll mention this in a moment, but there were some particular offices where he encountered some people who were rude. And the encounters were enough for him to question if he even belongs in a college environment, right? And thankfully, Gustavo had enough resiliency, something that Yosa talks about with that cultural capital, to say, I'm not going to let something minor like that determine what I'm going to do with myself, right? I'm going to focus on the bigger picture. This is about college, not about these couple of rude experiences that I've had, and I'm going to keep going. And I also really think some of that resiliency is attributed to Gustavo engaging in quite a few different student social clubs. So he belongs to, for example, there's a Latinx Student Alliance club on his campus. He, I believe, was a TRIO student. So I'm I feel very confident in saying that some of those social programs that he belonged to probably helped him with the resiliency, but also to Yosa's point, he had some internal resiliency that was built up over time that allowed him to overcome that experience. The reason I want to include it here is because we can't say that that's going to be true for all of our students, particularly those who might not have a connection to some of those social programs that'll give them that extra support, right? So if our students are encountering someone rude and they want to give up, it's just really important that we're cognizant of building connections for our students beyond maybe the 1 or 2 interactions that they're going to have on a commuter campus. Okay, so that was a lot of data thrown your way, a lot of interviews and GPA data. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on our next question, which is, what can your programs do to build college aspirations and navigational skills for our Latinx students? And you might find that your programs are already doing some of these things. But I want you to think specifically about your Latinx students. So again, what can your programs do at your individual colleges or high schools at any point in the process, in the CE process? What can your programs do to build our students' aspirations to go to college, their aspirations to get that college degree, and help build their skills to navigate through college?
Excuse me, I'm Woody Longmire with Harrison School District 2.
Hi, Woody.
Hi, though I do appreciate chatting, it feels somewhat standoffish. I thought we were going to have a discussion about things so we can really understand what's happening in each other program. I can type up data for you all day long, but if I can explain to you some things audibly, I think it'll have a big impact.
Yeah, well, let's hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Well, what can your program do to build college aspiration and navigational skills for Latinx students? Well, first of all, you have to make sure that they have the desire to be in the program. If they come to you and say, well, I really want to be a part of this program, you then have to tell them that if you have a desire, we're going to make sure that you have the aptitude to do it. It's okay to have a desire, but if you don't have the aptitude, it's kind of difficult for you. Not saying that you can't build on aptitude, but if you come to us with the aptitude, showing that you can handle upper level courses, then yes, you belong in this program. And want to make sure that they understand that this program is about them, not about their parents, not about your friends. Somebody long ago who said, well, I didn't get this opportunity. Who cares what they got? We're concerned about what you're going to do right now. Let them know that even though they may be a DACA student, you have no fear here in this district. This program is all about you and your colleagues. So in order for you to understand what is necessary to be proficient or to be successful in this program, you got to put some work into it. You're going to come to this program to learn. If you already know everything, because you're suffering from the halo effect, because your teachers have told you in the past that you're pretty and that you act smart, so you must be smart, so I'm going to just let you coast. No, you have to learn the system. I can't hold your hand, but I will guide you. I try to steer away from advising, because if I give you my advice and you take it and it don't go the way you thought it should, you're going to blame me forever. But if I give you guidance and show you all the opportunities that are out there, then you choose what you want to do. And understand that I'm going to be with you when you register for your classes. I'm going to be with you when you get ready to fill out your FAFSA. I'm going to be with you when you move to your four-year university or to your institution of trade. But understanding that it's not going to always be like me. You're going to get to those institutions like we talked about in the previous slide, where you're going to find some people that's going to be rude and obnoxious. And I got to explain to you that most of the time, those are work-study students. And some of them are very envious of you. You're getting all this free stuff, whereas they have to do work-study and they have to beg their parents to pay for their education because they make too much money. So get ready for that. But Harrison School District 2 is going to be with you while you're in high school, after you're out of high school, while you're in college, and hopefully even after you get out of college, because what we would like to see you do is come back to its community and contribute?
Yeah, I heard a couple of really important things that you said. First, kind of, if it's okay to summarize, yeah, I absolutely agree. It's really important that we're building some intrinsic motivation, right? And we really see that in some of those, the couple of negative experiences that were shown there. If we don't give students that intrinsic motivation to succeed, particularly when they encounter someone who's rude or, they're not shown how to do something, we want them to have the motivation to keep going, right? And yeah, I absolutely agree. There's things that we can do in our programs to help build that. And that's really the second, one of the second important things that you said, which is being there as a source of support. Not necessarily doing it for them, but giving them building those core navigational skills so that maybe the answer isn't right apparent in front of them, but we have given them some skills to be able to go out and find that answer on their own. And if they can't, still being there as a source of support. I didn't really talk about any of Yosa's other tenets, but one of the other ones that she talks about is the importance of our Latinx students having a social network that they can rely on, whether that be mentors, family, cousins who are going to college, for example. Just again, that network of support to be reliant on when they don't know how to quite do something themselves. I will actually bring up family. I think it's maybe in the, I want to say second recommendation, because it's important to recognize not all of our student demographic groups are the same, right? And so there's quite a bit of literature and data out there that talks about how important our families are to our Latinx students, that they're not making decisions just on their own, that it is a family decision. And the reason it's important to recognize this is because we don't want our students to just assimilate to a system that currently exists. Instead, we want our system to adapt to the needs of our Latinx students, right? And so part of that is recognizing the importance of family for some demographic groups of students. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides of, maybe how we can do that in an intrusive sort of way. Some other things that I saw here in the chat, for example, Don, I really liked your idea of, bringing Latinx alumni who can share their experiences with students. I think this is a consistent conversation, particularly in higher education, just the representation of our faculty and staff that mirror the demographics of our students that we're serving, right? So if we have a larger pool of, for example, either Latinx alumni who can either serve as mentors or do these one-off, share my experience type of, talks with our students, or it means, our Latinx students seeing more instructors who look like them, who have had similar experiences as them. It will be, maybe easier to reach out for that mentorship or that support that we were just talking about, Woody. And then the last thing that I wanted, to touch on that you mentioned that I think is really important, the third thing is really understanding, is this opportunity right for our students, right? Which is another one of the recommendations that I have, is just this focus on, are we doing this to enroll our students, or are we doing this to serve our students? And that has, to what you're saying, to your point, it has a basis in understanding that this opportunity is for our students at this time, right? Not all of our students are on the same pathway. Some will enter straight into the workforce, and that is the pathway for them, right? So forcing them into college classes just isn't for them. I saw that with my little brother, who also identifies as Latino, was forced to take concurrent enrollment classes, failed in them, had familial pressure to go to college, went to community college, failed his classes there, and now is working with his hands. So he's a heavy equipment operator and is happy as could be. And now that he's had some hands-on experience, is exploring some certificate programs that line up with that hands-on tactile learning that he needs, right? And this program just wasn't for him, but he was really highly pressured into it. So yeah, 3 points. Thank you, Woody. And I will, after some of these recommendations, I do want to open it up to that open discussion that you were talking about.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. So I'll give you these 4 recommendations for your programs and your schools. And the first one is that I really believe that we need to improve our research data. So we've gotten to the point where we're not, you know, we're not categorizing all students together and saying all CE students do this, right? I think most of our schools are being, and our institutions are doing pretty well at disaggregating data by race and ethnicity, gender, sometimes other demographic category groups. But really my recommendation here is more focused on changing current research practices that draw comparisons between white students and minoritized students, instead to ones that look at demographic groups as homogeneous populations, right? So what I did here, taking a specific look at Latino male students to really understand what are their lived experiences. And this recommendation is in line with CCCS's strategic plan, right? Assuring equity outcomes for students from underrepresented groups as compared to overall student outcomes. It's also in line with House Bill 9-1319 because there's an extended mission here to broaden access to serve our communities that have historically low college participation rates. And so really all in all, this proposed solution is really to, if we want to assure equity outcomes and we want to serve a wider range of students, if that's really our goal that we have in mind, we can't come to this without first understanding the problem. So while larger comparisons between groups can show that there's a general difference, I think we already know that. I think we already know that our white students are oftentimes outperforming all other demographic groups. So really it's that narrowed research that gives voice to an individual population's lived experiences, right? The second recommendation that I have for you is for concurrent enrollment programs to really expand their outreach to minoritized communities in meaningful and intentional ways. And so this speaks to that point that I was talking about, how in the majority of our Latinx communities, families are there with our students helping to make decisions, right? And so it means bringing students, their families, communities that they might belong to into the conversation of what does meaningful outreach look like for this particular community, right? This recommendation is really in line with, for example, the legislation that we see where we have to communicate and publicize our programs to students and parents and twice per year. There's some other connections here as well. And really, for example, it's in line with CDHE and CDE wanting to have students earn a credential after high school or earn college credit while they're in high school. Because these goals are rooted in erasing equity gaps and increasing the number of students who are earning, right? And so really considering that, 84% of Latino males in the study across the board are first-generation students, when we're, messaging and advertising and doing outreach, we're mostly doing what we think that community needs. And what we should be doing instead is intentional, impactful outreach, meaning that we as educators need to go into those communities and say, okay, what do you want to see? What does outreach and marketing material look like for you, right? It's really important that we're bringing students and families into the conversation so that they can better inform what their particular community needs and what that outreach should look like. So I have a couple of examples here. A lot of us are following guided pathways. The reason I really love this particular outreach material is because, yes, degree options are there, or if students, just really aren't sure and they say, okay, I have a couple of these personality traits that line up with, this communication and languages sort of broad spectrum. I think I want to do that. What I actually really love here is the focus on career options, right? So what we also know, what research also shows us, is that our Latinx populations are really honed in and focused on career options. So we actually see a big percentage of Latino males going straight into the workforce after high school graduation because they see their uncles, their dad, other family members in what they consider lucrative careers, earning $17 an hour at the body shop, or $17 an hour on the construction site. That looks like really good money. As a high school senior, sometimes dropping out all the way back to 10th grade. And so these career options really make that link of how important that job prospects are after degree outcomes. And then just an example here. So I'm from New Mexico, like I said. It was a really big shock for me coming out to Colorado and not seeing that literature and material out to schools aren't just automatically translated in home languages for students, right? So in New Mexico, it's very common to see school documents with English on the front and Spanish on the back. And so what's important to note here is that we shouldn't be making the assumption for the community, right? We shouldn't be making an assumption that all of our Latinx students are speaking Spanish at home. That's where these conversations are important. If the community is telling us, it would be important for families to understand what their students are doing and need to do that in the home language, then we can, translate documents and materials. But again, it all really starts with the conversation. So the third recommendation that I have for you is to further build community cultural wealth once students are in a CE program and individualize those efforts to target the barriers that specific demographic groups face. Because really the truth of the matter is our Latinx students are experiencing barriers that are sometimes similar but different from our Black and African American students who are experiencing barriers that are different from our white students, right? Who are experiencing different barriers even from our students whose home lineage is from outside of the United States. For example, in Aurora, we have a very large Ethiopian community. And so, this recommendation, it's of course in line with Yosa's model of community cultural wealth, as well as really any goals that, where we want to focus on getting, either the workforce or our schools to represent the diversity that we see out in the community, for example. And so really the point of this goal is to say that our instructors, our counselors, they really should be ensuring that our concurrent enrollment students know that they're in a college class, right? They should be holding ongoing conversations about degree goals, provide resources to support degree attainment when experiencing these barriers. And our concurrent enrollment administrators, what's really important here is that if the bottom line is focused on numbers, we really need to shift what that bottom line means away from enrollment and more onto, I should say, moving away from harmful narratives and practices that focus on, I'd say, the sheer volume of students enrolling in concurrent enrollment programs to really targeted efforts focused on sustaining our students' continued persistence, right? So where we want to be careful is when our goals focus on enrollment. So for example, to be an HSI institution, for example, we have to enroll 25% students Hispanic. Well, that particular, outcome focuses on enrollment. It doesn't focus on actually serving our students or credential outcomes, right? We see that with CDHE's goal of 66% of our students to earn a credential. Again, the focus is on that outcome, and so that we can really target our efforts on serving our students along the way. So the consideration here is like, would we be concerned if our students transferred to college, but then, dropped out after one semester? The question is, did we really prepare them for college if that's the case? Or, are we focused on enrollment and then passing on the blame once the students is transferred? Most important, I think, really are our efforts to support and sustain community cultural wealth, which focuses on, again, those individual communities of students rather than employing one blanket strategy and hoping that we get all students within that one strategy. So just to give you a couple of quick examples, I actually have, I'll link to my LinkedIn at the very end of the presentation. I'll just have it up there for you. And all of these materials are uploaded on a document on my LinkedIn page if you're interested in downloading them, using them. What I've also included in this document are some examples of what this looks like, right? So the one that's there, the flyer that says get involved, is a sample flyer that our instructors or our counselors can use to send out to concurrent enrollment students to connect them with programs on campus where they can receive not only that bridge and get that, but really get that support that we were previously talking about, right? Some other things that are included in there are, for example, sample essay prompts that instructors can use at the beginning of a concurrent enrollment class to, for example, build college culture. What does college culture mean? Let's define this, and how are we going to exude college culture in this class for the remainder of this semester. And then again, linking back to guided pathways. So I developed maps in which, our concurrent enrollment students can see all of the CE classes that are offered at their school. And so maybe a student says, okay, well, gosh, I like health and public service. I'm not exactly sure which route I want to go, but okay, here are some classes that my school offers to get me started. And then the next step here would be linking to guided pathways material maybe that your school has. What are those next classes after I've completed these ones? Last recommendation that I have for you is improving classroom instruction and advertising supplemental support, which really speaks to those 1.6, 1.9 GPAs that we saw, right? Across the board, it's just this particular recommendation, let me start here. It's in line with CCCS's strategic plan, with CDHE's second goal. And again, really with any goal that focuses on closing attainment gaps for students of color. So while first and second semester GPAs were higher for CE Latino males than non-CE Latino males, they were still problematic, right? The 1.6, the 1.9. If an entire population of students are experiencing low performance outcomes, we can't say that, well, as good as the students, that's as good as they can do, right? We need to do better. And that means improving classroom instruction as well as advertising supplemental support programs that are listed there. I want to take a moment here to, I'm going to skip the rest. I'll go straight to this last page here so you can connect if you want to have access to those resource materials that I showed you today, as well as, if you have any other private questions that you want to ask or just link up in any other way, please feel free. And I'd love to open up the conversation to the group. Any questions or thoughts that you may have?
I want to thank you, Dr. Beauchamp. We have about 4 minutes left. So if you've got a question, please ask it. But we will be leaving this meeting right at 9:50 to get prepared for the next. So thank you so much. That was a great presentation.
Oh yeah, my apologies. I thought we were ending at 10. So yeah, please feel free to ask any questions now, or I'll take any through email as well.
Stephanie, not a question, I just want to make a comment. I am just so pleased that you made this presentation to everybody, because these students need to know that we're here for them. We care about them. They were sent here, they were born to replace us. And if we don't prepare them to take over after we are gone, we have done them and their family a disservice. So I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.
Stephanie, there's a question that I have about the GPA of the students.
Sure.
And I was wondering, when you put them up in those first slides, what's the deviation, the standard deviation between one set to the other within that GPA mean?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I don't have that exact number off the top of my head. But Dr. Velasquez, if you would put your maybe send me your email, I'm happy to send you sort of the we'll call it the official report, and that actually has that mean in there.
One more question, and I think you kind of touched on it, was that a lot of the students identified differently than just Latinx. Right. And when you look at the research within the Latinx community, different sub-demographics perform much differently. And so by putting everybody into a giant pot, it really dilutes the data. Students that arrive, our new arrivals in high school, have like a 95% or 90% chance of not graduating high school. And so I just know that depending on when you arrive to the country, what groups you're actually identify as really have different indicators of the needs of those communities. And so I would like to see something along those lines as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's the deeper dive, right? not just different demographic categories or different identification categories, but also a timeline of arriving, right? First generation students can perform very differently than multi-generation students, right? Yeah, very important point. Yes, I love this in the chat, right? Expanding to look at students with disabilities, absolutely. And it seems like you're really picking up on the idea here of, those deeper dives at specific homogeneous data is really how we better inform our practices so that we really understand what those lived experiences are of one particular group so that we can, target efforts rather than, again, employ these blanket strategies that really, let's be honest, just aren't going to reach everyone.
Well, our time is up. So thank you all for participating. Thank you again, Dr. Beauchamp, for your presentation. And hopefully there's a second session that works well for you. Thank you. Don't forget to do the survey.
Thank you all.